Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 317 for Monday, September 30th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including on video on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to or watching this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me as always is an industrial Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Industrial indeed. I have been building a lot of belts and a lot of smelters in Satisfactory over the last couple of weeks, but happy to be talking about Minecraft again with all the news that we have to cover this week. I did spend a little bit of time in the pre-show talking about Satisfactory and the fact that I'm theming all of my builds after Transformers, something that I grew up watching. So that's been a lot of fun. If you're interested in that, that is part of the Render Distance, which is the extended version of the program that we record every single week. You can get access to that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. It's a fantastic way to support the show. And you get extra bonus content like an extra half an hour of audio every week. You also get access to things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which we recorded this past Saturday, the 28th, just ahead of Minecraft Live, as a matter of fact. We will have that available for patrons on the Patreon page right now. You can download that either via the RSS feed on the Patreon page or just listen to it right in the feed. You'll have a link to the Discord chat where all of our members were posting their screenshots, which is what we talked about for the Hangout. And that's an easy way to go back and check it out if you've missed it live. Coming up this Saturday, October 5th, we're going to be doing our quarterly Hangout. That's where we break down the downloads, the numbers, the YouTube metrics of the show. So if you're a member, you get access to that. You get to see how you're doing, or how we are doing, and how your support is helping us do that. Also, before we move on, happy International Podcast Day.
Oh, I had no idea. Well, here's to that. And here's to many more episodes of the Spawn Chunks.
Yeah.
It's always
Cheers.
A delight to be part of the podcast community. Speaking of which, we have a little bit of news about that we're not quite ready to announce yet, but hopefully you'll hear from us soon about something else. We're stretching our legs and maybe visiting some other podcasts here and there. So this week we have a shorter quick login, obviously mostly because we want to get straight to the news and talk about everything that happened with Minecraft Live and new snapshots and everything. But in your case, Joel, I think you've been in Satisfactory quite a lot, and it's eaten into the Minecraft time a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I did not log into Minecraft at all this past week. And even the week before, it was only just the Saturday to work on the moss farm. And I was happy with it, but I still haven't really in my brain sorted out like how to reconcile that project decoratively. And because of all the Satisfactory play, because of the Minecraft technical stuff I've been doing with the moss farm and the need to fix the internals of the storage system on the moss farm, I've just been in a very technical mindset. So on one hand, it's really good to take a break from Minecraft. I think that the level of time and energy that I've been putting into Satisfactory has kind of rekindled my technical brain for Minecraft. Like I want to do more technical stuff when I get back to the game. So I might not be returning to Westdale right away, even though that project is really close to being finished and it wouldn't take very long in terms of focusing on it to get it done. I just feel there's a bunch of things in Minecraft that I am like, there's a crunch. Shulker boxes, for example, I seem to always just need one more. And it would be great to have either a server farm or my own farm for shulker boxes and shulker shells. It's a great technical project. So I think that when I return to Minecraft, I'm going to be bringing my technical brain from Satisfactory in and applying that to some of the things that I think I need to make life a little bit easier and, just improve the quality of life on the server. But it's been really fun to have a break from Minecraft as well. Just working creatively with different shapes, angles, things that I can put in circles or things that have lighting and modern graphics. It's a nice video game break from the 16 pixel textures and stuff in Minecraft. Not that they don't have a place in my heart, but it's been inspirational, I think, to kind of break outside. And because I am focusing on a sci-fi area next in Minecraft on the Citadel, playing a sci-fi game like Satisfactory has also kind of like made me think about, how could I handle this? How could I make this work to my advantage? And everything in Satisfactory has to be built very large, and it's making me think I should build a little larger than player scale, maybe like stretch my legs a little bit creatively in Minecraft when it comes back to that sci-fi zone, because I think that'll be something that will have that grand appeal that you might see in sci-fi films like Blade Runner or other motion pictures. Like I recently went to go see Transformers 1 in theaters, and the environments in that and how they handled Cybertron and how big and expansive and everything was really, really cool. And I think doing that in Minecraft, especially with like some of the stuff we saw this weekend from our patrons in like custom biomes. My plan is to put the sci-fi zone in a mushroom field. So like I'll have the ability to do all kinds of stuff without having to worry about mobs. So there's all kinds of options I think that this time in Satisfactory has opened me up to in Minecraft. So I think that, when people will often write us and say like, hey, like I need some advice for building, or I need some advice for what to do next in this sandbox game. One of the things that can really help you is playing another sandbox game. Like it's going to scratch the itch that you have. Like you're that kind of gamer. So you'll have that experience, but then you can bring some inspiration from that other game back into Minecraft.
Yeah, you've absolutely preempted the question I was going to ask. I was kind of saving it from the pre-show to now. Is that like with all of the technology involved in Satisfactory and you building a sci-fi zone next, I thought it's kind of perfect fodder for that. Obviously, like shape-wise, you're constricted to the blocks that we have in Minecraft, but like you're planning on building on a mushroom island that's got like bright green grass, and like the screenshots you shared from Satisfactory have all been super colorful. And so I'm thinking like maybe there's room for like setting up a concrete maker and having that be an industrial project, and then using all of the bright colors from that to emulate the kind of building that you do in Satisfactory.
Oh, I 100% want there to be some color, like especially after years of gray and brown in West Hill. We've got pops of color here and there that are appropriate for like roofs for medieval builds, but to use the primary colors to really get into some broad, even cartoony type stuff, I think would be really, really fun. I like the, not industrial, I guess I'm trying to remember the name of what's the architecture term for like the really big boxy builds?
Like
it's
brutalist kind of?
Brutalist, thank you. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so like a mix of brutalist, but also like having those details and having layers, like the depth that you can get in Minecraft quite quickly just by adding different layers of blocks. And something that I've been noticing a lot in our community is like people using different blocks outside of normal context, like putting stone blocks in tree trunks because they're gray and they work. And it's just not what you normally think of in Minecraft, but it works contextually when you're doing a full biome. Using blocks in the sci-fi zone, like, am I going to be able to use wood? Probably not planks as often, but I might be able to use stripped logs or stripped wood, depending on what type of wood it is and what the context is for specific cases. And I'd like to try and do that because it's going to have a certain color to it. As long as the texture works, in context, I might be able to get away with it. And there's a lot of fauna and flora in Satisfactory as well. And I like the idea of not only just having my technical landscape happen in Minecraft, but also do some custom biomes, like come up with some alien trees and some, different looks to things. And we're limited in terms of we don't really have the ability to have different color water, but I could maybe use slime or honey for different things. Like there's a bunch of stuff that I think could be a lot of fun. And we have a lot of like hanging vegetation now in Minecraft, and I think that I could probably combine that with different things to create like cool bioluminescent mushrooms or stuff like that that's kind of in there. But I think that, the shape language and the number of times in Satisfactory that you have to use something that is like a beam or a beam connector or a foundation, and then you're using that as something else, like you're using it as like an arm or a part or support where it's not always meant to be there. I've seen players use railings for things that are actually turned into fences. I've seen players in Satisfactory use things like lights or signs for indicating like anti-gravity pads, like stuff like that your brain just kind of in context makes use of the different things. So I want to try and apply that to Minecraft and kind of push my boundaries on like, just because it's a trapdoor doesn't mean that it has to be a trapdoor in context. Like if you put enough of them together, it could look like an exhaust fan. If you put enough of them together in an X formation, then you could also have it look like the thinking like the fins on the back of a spaceship. If it's the right color, it might work, right? And if you're, I think to your point too of like going back to primary colors, because so many of the components in Minecraft that are unique and fun are colorful. Thinking about like birch trapdoors and the warped trapdoors, like they're bright colors. If I can use bright colors everywhere, then it's not going to feel so out of context to have like turquoise fins on a spaceship, right? So if I can push the boundaries of what the things actually are, I think that it'll be a lot of fun.
Which is what people have done in Minecraft for so long, like just based on the limitations. Like you think about the amount of people who immediately started using hanging signs as like railings for bridges and stuff like that, right? Like it's the same kind of principle. Well, I have obviously had the luxury of playing on a modded server for the last little while, so half the time, if there's a building block people wanted, it's in this mod pack. It's limited to fantasy stuff, so like it's not absolutely anything and everything, but I have been working a lot more on the Necromansion on the Fantasy Minecraft SMP. I'm planning on getting this done in early October so it can sort of be there for the remainder of Halloween, but then I can get back into Survival Guide and a Skyblock series that's going to be launching in October to celebrate 10 years of my YouTube channel. Bizarre though that milestone sounds to say out loud. So for now I'm kind of trying to hustle ahead with the Necromansion, which is my spooky build on Fantasy Minecraft SMP. Right now, it has 4 walls and a roof, which is more than it had previously, so very happy with the roof being done, question mark. I just need to be happy with it, and right now I'm not. I started having this sort of slope up towards the center of the building so that it could have, a roof ridge that, dormer windows and stuff could be added to. I've got a big stained glass window on the back of the build now, and there's a back door that I'm building in there. There's a few bits and pieces that I'm still working on, but the central part of the roof, effectively like the slope of the roof ended up finishing at a certain point, and then in the center there was just this big long rectangle I needed to fill in somehow. So I thought I'll change the pitch of the roof and just add a kind of hip roof segment in there, and it didn't really work for me. And that was the last thing I did before I ended my stream this week. So I'm probably going to go back in there and add maybe like a pop-up, like a riser section in the center that's got its own peaked roof, and add a tower next to that, and kind of build a few more asymmetrical, more modular-looking sections of the build to give it that kind of Addams Family house look, where it's slightly off-kilter and like a little bit kind of spooky just by it not being perfectly symmetrical. Like the symmetry is broken after a certain point. But yeah, like that's the state I'm at with that. I don't really have too much else to share. I've just been working on restoring my skill tree at the same time, where, having erased all of my skill progress last week, it's sort of back to normal thanks to the Wither Skeleton farm. And as a result of that, I have a ton of coal blocks, a ton of bone blocks. If I want to include any kind of spookier blocks in there, then I've got plenty to work with from the Wither Skeleton farm. And there's a couple of other bits and pieces they've been dropping, like occasional diamond equipment and stuff. So I'm post scarcity, I think, on this server now. I've got everything that I really need to do. I've got a decent amount of XP flowing in and stuff. So if there's anything else I want to get done quest-wise and progression-wise with the group before I bid farewell to Fantasy Minecraft SMP, that's probably going to happen in the next week or so.
Have you looked into Coraline, the film Coraline, for some inspiration for your rebuild?
Not specifically for this build. I definitely know it. So I've seen like production design stuff, and like it's the guy who directed Nightmare Before Christmas, who is not Tim Burton. I think it's Henry Selick is the director.
I think so. Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah. It's just a great way to have some like creepy stuff that's not so Tim Burton, because I find like Tim Burton stuff is challenging because there's not a straight line in the whole production design of anything that he does. It's always crooked somehow. Spiral
hills and stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Everything is always messed up. Although there's a new Nightmare Before Christmas Lego set. So if they can do it in Lego, then you might be able to find some ideas for Minecraft. But yeah, Coraline has got that nice balance between like creaky and old and spooky, but not like twisted and evil. Like it has some stuff going on there that's always really cool. Especially when she goes into like the other world. I can't remember exactly what they call it, but there's a bunch of different strange designs there that could be really fun for the Necromansion. But it's cool that you have got so many spooky blocks. Like it's like the Wither Skeleton farm, as a result of like you needing to get back into your tech tree, also gives you like coal blocks and bone blocks and like the kind of like desaturated, creepy material things that you would want for a build like that. So that's cool.
Yeah, definitely. I might work some of the coal blocks into the roof structure, which right now is all black stone bricks, and I need a bit of texture in there just to shake things up a bit. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with it. Like, as far as its place in the RPG town, it looks a bit more like a complete build now, so I'll have some screenshots to share post-show, and we'll see how it gets done. But yeah, maybe another week or so of this, and then I'll be back into Survival Guide and working on something that's maybe a little bit less spooky, not quite timely for Halloween, but we've got plenty of spooky stuff to cover in the news. So we're going to get right into it. For a start, we'll cover the snapshot, and then Joel will get into the announcements from Minecraft Live, and that's going to be the bulk of our discussion on today's episode, as you might expect. But first, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 24W39A was released earlier last week, and it says, with this snapshot, we're now bundling bundles into the game for real. Bundles are no longer experimental. Happy mining. The other changes in 24W39A include an updated slot highlight in the UI, so the item texture has better visibility. The previous textures have been added to the Programmer Art resource pack, and now equipping a carved pumpkin on your head removes the player marker from other players' maps. In technical changes, the data pack version is now 55. Boat and chest boat entity types have been split into separate types, one per existing variant. And variants of boats and chest boats now have separate entity types instead of a type field. More details on new entity names are in the Minecraft.net changelog for those of you who need the information on that. There's also been some changes to container locks. The lock field of containers has been renamed to just lock and is now an item predicate. Any items which match the predicates can open the container, can be used as keys, effectively, to a locked chest. The lock data component is now also an item predicate. In terms of tags and item tags, map invisibility equipment was added as a tag for items that can be equipped to hide the player marker on other players' maps. So if you're making a minigame, you don't just have to use pumpkins on players' heads, you can use other items for that as well. Fixed bugs of note in 24W39A. Bowls being consumed when feeding a rabbit stew to a wolf has been fixed. Drowned not summoning reinforcement anymore has also been corrected. The time you remain on fire no longer increases while being in the fire was an issue that's also been fixed. Along with a few other fixes, slimes or magma cubes spawned by splitting synchronize inherited status effects. Ender pearl interactions with bubble columns were broken. Entities with emissive eyes were not properly affected by fog of any kind. Underwater fireballs were constantly playing a fire extinguishing sound, and arrows and potions were also resisting upward flowing bubble columns. All of those have been fixed, along with a handful of other bugs in this snapshot. You can find them on the Minecraft.net changelog, which is linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
Speaking of Minecraft.net, Mojang has published a recap article for Minecraft Live 2024 that was broadcast on Saturday, September 28th. Quote, a new biome, a new hostile mob, insight into a Minecraft movie, secret footage from the Minecraft office, awe-inspiring worlds from our developers, including the legendary Jens Borgsten himself. We managed to pack all of this and more into Minecraft Live 2024. The Spawn Chunks, of course, covered the event live on Saturday, September 28th. You can find that video on our YouTube channel. During the live presentation, Mojang announced the Pale Garden, a spooky new desaturated biome with gray trees and a creepy new mob, the Creaking. The Pale Garden is populated with pale oak trees, which can be crafted into pale oak wood and other wood-related blocks. Bundles of Bravery was also announced. Bundles are coming to Minecraft, as Jonny mentioned in the Snapshot news, and Hardcore mode is coming to Bedrock Edition. A Minecraft movie featurette was also featured in the presentation with behind-the-scenes looks at how the film was made, including production design, physical props, and an interview with the film's director, Jared Hess. The Minecraft Experience was also showcased during the live presentation, and this is the Minecraft Experience Villager Rescue. It's an in-person immersive experience coming to Dallas, I believe, in the next few weeks. It gives a chance to enter the Minecraft biome in real life. It's brought to you by the partners of Mojang at Experience MOD, and again premieres in Dallas on October 18th, 2024.
So Minecraft Live, obviously our main discussion. There's a couple of things that I want to touch on just as a general thing about Minecraft Live. It was a much shorter show this year, and it was very focused on just delivering information, just delivering news about Minecraft, and less of the fluff. There was no mob vote segment. There were fewer segments highlighting community stuff and individual community tools, where in previous years they've had stuff about Blockbench and Bedrock modding and that kind of stuff. This time around, there were a lot more streamlined presentations. Obviously, a bit of news about the Minecraft movie I think was kind of going to happen anyway, but I think was necessary after the reaction to the teaser trailer. And then it was all kind of over and done with within, I think, about 35, 40 minutes, something like that.
Yep.
And then after that, they had a developer post-show where a bunch of them sat around in what I assume was a live context this time and demonstrated some of the gameplay of the Pale Garden and the Creaking, both how you could build with the blocks involved and how the Creaking worked and how they even showcased it as like a mini game that you could play. Like they put together a mini game arena for two of the developers to kind of battle it out. So I think all in all, I was really happy with how Minecraft Live went this year. It felt like they were respecting our time in a way that maybe has been not everyone's favorite thing in previous years, the way there's like a lot of waiting around for the stuff right at the end where the actual news for those of us who are just interested in gameplay development happens. And I think this one was like a lot more short and sweet. It was succinct, and I appreciated that.
I agree. Yeah, I just will chime in and say that I think all of that is true. And in addition to that, I really liked the fact that it wasn't a stage show. It was a look into the Mojang offices. Like we get to see the creative spaces where Minecraft is made, where these people work. Got to see shots of people at work, which I think I've even mentioned on the show a couple of weeks ago. Would be really cool to see, similar to the Minecraft Dungeons developer previews that we got when they were adding new stuff to that game and trying to build up hype for it. They did that with Minecraft Live. You know, they get to show the people that were working on the sound or working on the textures were in front of a camera and shown at their desk recording sound and doing stuff for the new biome. Like, I think that was really cool to see, and I think it really helps communicate the amount of love and care and work that the Mojang developers put into Minecraft, and that it's not the kind of thing that they can just pump out new features all the time. Like, it takes time to make these decisions consciously in the offices with a real mission. And I think that they did a really good job of showcasing that without having to preach it. And I think that's, I mean, I've always obviously had respect for the Minecraft devs, but like showing the behind the scenes like that is just such a cool thing. You and I have talked before about how cool it was to have like behind the scenes featurettes on DVDs, which you don't seem to really get anymore because so much stuff is just released on streaming. Every now and again, there's a Disney Plus special on like behind the scenes on Star Wars or whatever. But like this kind of stuff, I think is a really unique opportunity that game developers have to pull back the curtain, show how the stuff is made, show how your input matters, you know, as a player. And something that was interesting at the top of Minecraft Live, which they've mentioned before in trailers for other drops, but this is the first time I think Minecraft Live it's been really prominent, was the fact that everything that you were about to see is a work in progress.
Yeah.
And may change before it's actually implemented. They also never released any dates. They said coming in the next few months. And I think that gives them time to collect player feedback, potentially make changes if they want to or need to, and then have it be not just game ready when it's ready, but also integrated with what the players are also wanting and expecting, if possible. Like if that matches the vision of what they want to do with the new features. So I think overall, great presentation.
Absolutely. And like I said, more thoughts in the main discussion. Let's talk about the Snapshot. It's a short and sweet one as well. Happy to see bundles are ready to go. And I encourage anyone who's still on the fence about bundles to try them in survival instead of dismissing them on a theoretical basis, because I think getting some practical hands-on experience with a bundle is really what's going to sell you on it. I think if you just try and think it through, you're like 64 items isn't very much or whatever, then I think you're sort of missing the point of how useful they can be, especially now they're so easy to craft when you've got one leather and one string and you can make a bundle that way. Speaking of Minecraft Live, Matthew Gatland's segment about explaining bundles and a little bit of the thought process behind, you know, how they researched how players use their inventory and took screenshots of people streaming Minecraft when they had their inventory open and saying, like, how many of these items in their inventory could they put in a bundle, and finding that most people could clear up at least 8 spots of their inventory and it would like really save them some space. I think that was really cool to hear about that. But he also gave one of the best explanations of the justification for bundles, which is that if you go mining in Minecraft in an older version, a lot of the time the only block you're gathering is stone. And now if you go mining in a straight line anywhere underground in Minecraft, you're getting 4 or 5 maybe different types of stone. You're getting a mix of stone, the decorative stone types, tough, deep slate, you know, a variety of things like that. And so even if you mine 464 blocks, that's taking up 5 or 6 spaces of your inventory where it could just be taking up 1. And I think that's a really great way of looking at it. So I'd encourage anybody who's still on the fence about bundles to go and watch that segment of Minecraft Live where they explain the Bundles of Bravery update, and maybe you'll be a little bit more convinced than just thinking about it on your own.
I agree. I've certainly had my eyes open a little bit more to them in the last few weeks, hearing from you, hearing from the developers. My question is, if that was the design intention behind the bundle, why are we only just hearing about it now? Like, why wasn't that pitched when they showed bundles in experimental? they could have had that kind of, even if it was written in an article that you and I could have communicated. Like, I feel like that clarifies what players' expectations of bundles should have been from the get-go.
Yeah.
Rather than players wanted it to be a fix-all, just a chest. Like, it's none of those things. And it was never intended to be any of those things. And I think that if we had known this a little bit earlier, then I think that could have helped a smoother landing for the bundle, and less pushback. Or I wouldn't say less pushback, less this is cool and all, but like, it's not what we want. And I think that if they showed what the intention was a little bit more from the beginning, I'm assuming they had it, then that would have been a little bit smoother. But I think they're great. I think that in that context, and especially in the example of modern day Minecraft, where you're getting so many different blocks underground, I think it's a really good example. And I did mention this in the pre-show, but there's a feature in Satisfactory called the Dimensional Depot that's brand new with the 1.0 release. And it's very similar in that it gives you access to upload stuff that you are picking up to a dimensional depot, a pocket dimension in the game. And what it does is, when you're out exploring in Satisfactory and you're picking up like a yellow slug, a blue slug, a Mercer sphere, a summer sloop, which all take up a single space of inventory space, you can upload those things quite quickly, and then leave space in your inventory for picking up other stuff if you need to. And I think that's great, because one of the things that you realize in Satisfactory, same thing with Minecraft, is that you have an inventory crunch, and it's part of the game as to how to manage it properly. And bundles have that same sort of purpose. Like, you pick up early game, you pick up berry bushes, you pick up different crops, you pick up all this kind of stuff that's each, you only need one or two of them to bring home to then cultivate and grow and make your own, but they're each taking up a slot. And I think that bundles are a really good way to help clean it up. I like your example that you've said on the show too, about using it for your profession blocks or your tools. We've had people mention ender pearls and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think going back to when Ulraf announced them in the Caves and Cliffs update presentation of Minecraft Live way back, like before it was split up and everything, when they were announcing bundles along with archaeology and a few other features, I don't think the intention behind them has ever really changed. Like, Ulraf describes them as like, there's always spaces in your inventory that's just got like a couple of flowers or just one wheat seed, because you've been breaking grass blocks to harvest them, but the grass on top has been breaking and dropping seeds in your inventory. And if you don't want to throw that stuff away, that's what the bundle is for. But I think the clarity of communication around it, they've really been able to spend this time, especially with rethinking the way the bundle's UI looks and how they can bring it to Bedrock Edition. They have clarified and condensed all of the information about how you're supposed to use it into something that's a lot more digestible. Back when everyone was still like working on the bundle in the early stages, it felt like a very new idea, and it felt like people hadn't got used to talking about it in the most concise way yet. So I think the explanation has evolved as much as the interface has. The other stuff to cover in the snapshot, again, is very brief, but I like the fact that pumpkins can now prevent players from showing up on maps. I think that's really cool for a variety of reasons. Like, imagine doing, I think an Among Us style minigame is one I've seen sort of suggested in a few chats when I've been looking at stuff for the snapshots and Minecraft Live feedback, is, you can imagine a player holding a map and being able to see where some people are moving around, but then one of the markers disappears when it's in a certain area, that person's up to something. If they're an imposter in this kind of social deduction game, then they have to hide themselves from the map to do clandestine stuff, and you don't know who's going to be taken out of the picture. You could also have, dispense a pumpkin onto somebody, and then that removes them from the map. And so that's a way of like eliminating people from a game like that. There's a few little mechanical things that you can imagine people doing with that could be really fun. Alternatively, it just declutters a map if all you want to look at is the top-down view of it. It's a shame you can't see yourself not appearing on a map because you have the pumpkin on your head, and so the UI is going to be over the top of you. But I think a lot of people play with a resource pack that removes the pumpkin overlay so that you can still see what's going on there, and sometimes removing the player marker from those maps is desirable. So I like the fact that we're now given the option to do stuff like that.
It could be a really fun asymmetrical game too. I can't remember the name of the example, but something where a player would be controlling a monster, and then the other players are all trying to kill the monster.
Like Dead by Daylight, I think, is the most prominent.
Is that one?
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, that's.
So that could be fun if like the monster in this context in a mini game is a player with a pumpkin on their head. So like you can see you and your other co-players and your teammates, but you can't see the monster. And so
Yeah.
you just you see one person disappear. Like, uh-oh, like did they just get eaten or are they now the monster? Like what? Like how did that happen? Kind of the weird game of tag. I thought that was really cool. The other bug fixes that I've noticed the last couple of weeks have been focused on entities interacting with bubble columns. We saw a fix to squids a couple of weeks ago. There's new ones now with other entities being fixed and how they interact with bubble columns. I think ender pearls was one of them with the more recent changes to ender pearls and how they work.
Yeah.
And I think that it's great quality of life because sometimes when you're working so hard to have a really immersive environment and decorative biome in Minecraft with like a waterfall and bubbles at the bottom of the waterfall, watching a squid shoot 20 meters up in the air at the base of your waterfall really takes you out of it. And so it's nice that they're kind of paying attention to those kind of things. And I think too that because again, Joel's automation brain is thinking that water and entities are one of the primary ways to work things around in Minecraft and move items around in the overworld. And to have consistency with bubble columns, to have consistency with how entities work with water, I think is great. And working out those little bugs will just help any kind of player frustration in like, I did this and I made it my own. Why is it not working? Well, you're experiencing a bug in how ender pearls interact with bubble columns. So we fixed that. Like, I think that's great. I did get a good chuckle out of the fact that they fixed the fact that in some cases, very hungry wolves were eating the bowls along with the rabbit stew.
Yeah.
That gave me a chuckle. I thought that was pretty good.
Just chomping down some wood along with all of the carrots and potatoes and everything that goes into a rabbit stew. That's so funny. The one bug fix I immediately saw jump out was drowned spawning reinforcements again, because I think a couple of people discussed it last week, like that was an intentional nerf to copper farms, and I've used that mechanic back on the Empires Season 2 server when me and Azuma set up a copper farm out in the end, and it was so useful that I can't imagine it being intentional necessarily that it was fixed. Like, there are a lot of ways to farm copper, but drowned reinforcements is one of the more productive ones. Obviously, now we have the option for players to go to trial chambers and get all of the copper from there, but I think it's important that players have a variety of means to get hold of that stuff, especially renewably. So I'm quite pleased that that was a bug fix. I think that was promising, at least, that they're not getting rid of farming methods for copper entirely. But for now, we're going to move on into the email portion of the show. We got one related to Minecraft Live, so we're going to fold that into the main discussion. But first of all, we have a separate topic to discuss. If you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Write in, keep your emails short and to the point, and it helps us include them in the show more easily. I'm sure lots of folks have opinions about what we saw at Minecraft Live, so we'd love to cover a couple of those questions and comments as the weeks roll on. But for now, Joel is going to read this first one.
This first email comes from Superfast Feg, dying for a change. Hi, Jonny and Joel. Absolutely loving the show. I wish I'd discovered the Spawn Chunks years ago, although now I do have hundreds of back episodes to enjoy. Last week, I was listening to your discussion about the ability to dye bundles and wondered whether dyeing could or should be applied to other items in the game. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of mining and frequently switching between my Fortune and Silk Touch pickaxes. Although they're named, these tags don't show up when alternating between them in the hotbar, and I keep forgetting which is which. The ability to color the pickaxes, perhaps through a dyed handle or something similar, would make this much easier and use the right tool at the right time. I'm sure this could also be helpful in a way of making other items have different enchantments or purposes, such as tools, weapons, books, etc. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks again for such a great podcast. Superfast Feg died from shame after unintentionally fortuning deep slate emerald ore.
As you should. Boo. At least it was unintentional. At least you're not a true villain. You're just an accidental villain. Yeah. No, trust me. I carry a Silk Touch and a Fortune pickaxe with me at all times. And I find that naming the tools always works for me. I think I'm just used to hovering over them with a mouse to check for Silk Touch and then number hotkeying it into slot 2 if I need to swap them. That's typically the way I interact with my tools. I'm kind of wondering if stuff like this would be possible via Resource Pack now. Like if enough item component data is available behind the scenes to Resource Pack creators that you can make sure that any pickaxes with Silk Touch have a different texture or are available like as a different color. Because you can do that with item durability, changing the item sprite based on how broken a tool is, right? So I kind of wonder if it's possible to do that with enchantments as well these days. The other thing is, a while back, I played with the Quark mod, and that added runes. I'm not sure if this is still the case because Quark is still like ongoing. I think still maintained. But they were kind of like smithing templates, but what they did was change the enchantment glow color. And I always really liked that concept. I thought it was great to be able to change the fire resistance armor piece to have a red glow instead of a purple one, for example.
Right.
I know there's been changes to the
sense.
way enchantment glow renders on certain objects these days, and there's a slider to change it. So it wouldn't surprise me if stuff like that was still customizable and maybe, again, relates to a resource pack. So I don't know, maybe look into that. There might be community resources out there that will help you differentiate between your tools on the fly without needing to make it a hard and fast game feature.
If not a resource pack, then a combination of a resource pack and a data pack would probably get you there too, given the amount of access you have with data packs. The trouble, of course, is like, are you capable of writing it yourself, or do you need to try to find one that's already been made? I also name my pickaxes. I usually have funny names like, Harriet the Hammer is my fortune pickaxe. I don't remember the name of my Silk Touch pickaxe. I want to say it's like Silky Sally, or like I use like a girl's name, usually like a girl's dog name or something, and then some sort of descriptor that's like feather like or light versus like hard and hammer and stuff like that for different tools. I never seem to have a problem picking one over the other. I don't know whether that's a Java mouse over thing, like whether I just don't really think about it much, or I just remember which is which in my inventory. The idea of dyeing the handles is cool. I don't know that the sprite would really communicate a lot, because the sprite is really not that big in terms of how wide the handle is in Minecraft.
Yeah.
And in a way, sometimes I wish that the sprites, again, and you could do this with a resource pack maybe, having a little bit extra resolution in the sprites for the tools would be good, because then if the pickaxe had like a pommel or had a larger like head section, like where the pickaxe parts connect to the handle, if those could be dyed. I think you mentioned runes. Having like a gem or something in the head of a pickaxe that you could change the color of would be kind of neat, and helping you discern from one to the other. I know one of the things that I've seen in a Vanilla Tweaks resource pack is the ability of having the inventory sprite of waxed copper have like a yellow highlight around it, but that doesn't affect how the block looks in the world.
Yeah.
So it could be something that you could do in your inventory texture pack for just the inventory appearance of the pickaxe, so that in your hand it really doesn't look any different than a Minecraft pickaxe. It's just that in your inventory you can tell quite quickly, green one is your Silk Touch and red one is your fortune pickaxe. That could be something to worth looking into as well. Even if it's just like a highlight around the box of the inventory. Maybe it's not specific to the sprite. Maybe it's just like anything with fortune enchantment will just have a red box around it. Like that could be really useful too. I vaguely recall a mod pack from years ago that had different enchanted book textures for every enchantment. And they were different models as well as different colors. It was like a spellbinding thing. The one that came up in Google for me was Nico's Enchanted Books, but it doesn't look familiar, so I don't know whether that's the right one. But I thought that was really cool, because it's not really adding anything to the player inventory, because enchanted books don't stack anyway. I think the only challenge there is that when you're talking about books and having different dyes or different colors for books, you deal with, sometimes books have more than one enchantment on it. So which enchantment is the one that dictates the texture or the color? Maybe it's the top one. If books only had the one enchantment, then that would make a lot of sense. But I could see a lot of really fun creativity happening. Again, maybe if the sprites were a little bit higher resolution, for things like feather falling on a book, having a feather on the cover of the book, and maybe the book's white. Just things like that would make such a big quality of life change when you're going through the inventory of a big chest of books and you're trying to find feather falling 3 amongst like everything that you've got in that chest. And it's just a lot of like time in menu, which we've talked about it before, and having more visual stuff, color coding, I think, in the game that doesn't require words, but requires just visual context, I think is great. It's one of the reasons I like my Shulker Plus mod, that allows me to have items on the shulker boxes. So 4 brown shulker boxes each have wood items in it, but I've got different kinds of wood on the cover of that shulker box, and it means that I can quickly discern between wood that's oak, spruce, dark oak, etc. And I don't have to read anything. And I think that that's what they're getting at, what Superfast Veg is getting at, is the ability to quickly discern what's in your inventory via color coding as opposed to having to read pop-up text. And I think, one thing that they've done recently, dyed bundles. Like that's a great way to have 3 or 4 different bundles in your inventory. One for like you use for your profession blocks, another thing for like food and collectibles that you're picking up, and another thing for maybe precious gems and minerals that you're collecting. And I think you could just color code them, and that helps a great deal. But I don't know in game if there's a way to do it without, like you said, texture packs and outside influence on tools and other things.
Yeah, I think dyes always work best for organization in situations where you need more than like 2 or maybe 3 of something, right? Like you're thinking shulker boxes, you're thinking bundles now. And I feel like when it comes to tools and weapons, I barely have more than 2 at most. Like I've got a Silk Touch one and a normal one, or a Fortune one, or whatever it happens to be. Like I rarely switch swords, so like sometimes I'll have a backup Smite sword when I'm fighting the Wither specifically, but then I mostly make do with sharpness, and the same goes for axes. I don't typically keep more than 1 axe on me. So I think most of the time it's going to be unnecessary, but yeah, I can see it working for specifically pickaxes, because you always want to have a bit of variety there. But yeah, there's not really the need for it over a broader scale on tools. Like I like the idea, like ultimately I wouldn't say no to it if they decided they were going to implement it, but I think it's pretty far down my wish list in terms of like quality of life changes.
It's also a fun RP idea too, right? Like if you wanted to
for sure,
have your pickaxe be the red one and your buddy's pickaxe be the blue one, that kind of stuff could be fun. And if they linked it to something like, again, exploration in the game, being able to smithing templates mean that you have to look around and do the work and do the grind to collect those smithing templates if you want that. I think we've even mentioned having smithing templates be something that could be applied to tools in the past, and that could be a great way to do it if they just added more to that gameplay mechanic. And then for people that don't really care about the armor decor, but like, oh, wait a minute, me being able to decorate my pickaxe could be cool and useful. I think that might be one way to go too.
Yeah, adding tool trims as well as armor trims, potentially, in future. For now, though, let's talk about what we know they're adding, because Minecraft Live 2024 has now passed, and we're going to share some of our first impressions and extended thoughts on the announcements from the Minecraft Live presentation and the developer preview that followed, showcasing some of the new progress features in-game. We have Bundles of Bravery coming soon, with Bundles and Hardcore mode arriving in Bedrock Edition. We have a Minecraft movie featurette that was shown there, along with a bit of a preview of the Minecraft experience, which I don't think we have too many additional thoughts about, but we've definitely got some thoughts on the Minecraft movie featurette. We also got a look at the upcoming gameplay drop after Bundles of Bravery, which features the Pale Garden and the Creaking, along with some new wood types, some new organic blocks, and a couple of other features snuck in there as well. We are going to fold back into the email that we got related to the Pale Garden, but we'll get there when we get there. Where do you want to start, Joel?
I think we just go with Bundles of Bravery. I mean, we've talked a lot about bundles in the snapshot, and I don't really have a lot to add here. I mean, I think it's cool that they're bundling this together with a game drop. You've got the bundles coming for everybody. You've got the hardcore mode coming for Bedrock players. I feel like Mojang is slowly leveling the playing field when it comes to the player experience across Java and Bedrock editions. Yeah. I'm sure it's going to be nice for Bedrock players that are watching Java players play hardcore, admiring that kind of gameplay, wishing they could try it themselves. Maybe they don't have access to Java, and now they're going to be able to participate in that part of the community, and I think that's great. I think that it's a welcome change for the Bedrock players, I'm sure. I am curious to see the timeline for Bundles of Bravery as it moves through the final Java snapshots. I feel like we'll start to see more with beta previews over the coming weeks as well. The one, I guess, thing that's left as far as guesswork is that they only said coming weeks for Bundles of Bravery. They only said coming months for the other stuff that they talked about in the Minecraft Live. So we really don't know, outside of like historically, there's been a new game drop around December that has more content, and June. And I don't know. They did not indicate whether they are sticking with those kind of timelines. The fact that bundles are now no longer in experimental in the current snapshots suggests that over the next few weeks, we might see release candidates and all that kind of stuff happening in the snapshot cycle, especially if there are things that are coming later this year before Christmas. They might want to get those things into snapshots sooner than later. And so I would anticipate, just historically speaking, that Bundles of Bravery is probably going to be an October thing, maybe. We'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, it's all positive. Like it's a very simple drop. There's not a lot going on in terms of, we've already known a lot about bundles, so I'm happy to see them moving forward with it.
Yeah, definitely. I like the name. I think the name is kind of cute. I like the contents. And like, I'm not a hardcore player or a Bedrock main, so the hardcore side of things doesn't really interest me, but I'm, like you, happy for the folks who'll be able to play out their hardcore worlds on whatever devices they end up using. And my main thing, I hope, is that Bedrock is rid of the bugs that were killing people randomly for just, like, pillaring up and other sort of innocuous activity like that. I think maybe that one got squashed a while ago, but things have a tendency to resurface when code gets shuffled around. Last time I played Bedrock, I was visiting the Truly Bedrock server to participate in a game show that they had set up on there, and they pointed out that the bug was still occurring where once you took damage, you couldn't heal up to a full 10 hearts of health. You were always on 9.5. And so I feel like Bedrock Hardcore with that is just going to be like that little bit extra dangerous, which is kind of funny. But yeah, like, I think with bundles coming to the game relatively soon, I would imagine we'd start to see pre-releases pop up, if not this week, then next week. And then we remember that every time they announce a pre-release or a release candidate, they remind you that they don't follow the Wednesday cycle of appearing in Snapshots, right? So pre-releases can pop up basically anytime, like, if not like Monday, then Friday, that kind of thing. So I would expect that we'll start to see bundles being, like, finalized over the next week, and then maybe even get a release the week after, following which I would expect they want to put out stuff like the Pale Garden and the Creaking right before Halloween, because if they're not going to hit Halloween for a release for a spooky update, they're at least going to get it in snapshots and betas for people to try. And I think that's going to be a really fun way of people spending Halloween with a spooky Minecraft update, even if it's still, give us some feedback on this and we want to make it perfect from there.
Yeah. Really, you think they're going to be able to release the Pale Garden and the Creaking by Halloween? I feel like that's...
I don't think full release, but I think snapshot.
Oh, snapshots.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Because the way that I was thinking with the Pale Garden and the Creaking would be like December at the earliest.
I think they're still going to take a few months to refine stuff, but what we saw in the gameplay demo was already pretty functional. Like, it's not like they're putting this stuff out there and it's not doing anything yet. I think it's really just like they put it out there for player feedback, and they say, should we change the way the Creaking moves? Like, like the kind of stuff that they did with the armadillo, where it was like, is the texture right? Like, should the eyes be on the front or on the sides? Like, some of the stuff that they wanted a little bit of player feedback on, but was not going to be implementing entirely new features, right? The refinements can be made in a couple of months, and I think that's smart. I think it's great to give us something to play with in the meantime, and if they want to have it out by the end of the year, then I think a couple of months of snapshots and pre-releases is going to be pretty feasible. So yeah, we'll see, but I presume it's going to be targeting like a winter holiday release for the Pale Garden stuff, so that'll be just before Christmas or just after, perhaps. Should we talk about the Minecraft movie stuff now before we get into the meat of the Pale Garden? Because I feel like that's what I've got the most feedback about, but I want to touch on the Minecraft movie stuff first, if that's cool with you.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I thought it was really cool to see the behind-the-scenes production of the film. I like that kind of stuff anyway. But to learn that Weta was involved, and because they're so famous for a lot of films actually that you maybe don't know about, but the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies, of course, are the big ones where people hear Weta, they go, oh, wait a minute, that's some top quality stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think they've also worked on other big projects as well. But seeing the production design, seeing the production designer talk about the challenges of moving this meter by meter block world into something feasible, where if you take it literally, it's far too big. Like, it makes people feel small. And they ended up going, I think they mentioned in the featurette, with like a 60% scale. So a block in the Minecraft movie is 60 by 60 centimeters, not 100 by 100 centimeters. And then they also have stuff that they scaled up or down depending on where it was in the shot. So if it was farther away, they made it bigger cubically. And if it was closer to this camera, they made it smaller, so it didn't look like this giant honking, cube. Like a bush would just look like a giant box if it didn't have smaller cubes in it. So I think that was really interesting how they had to take like what Minecraft is literally, but then how does that translate visually to filmmaking? How does that work with perspective and layers in the camera and cinematography and stuff? And I thought that was really cool. And we did get a little bit of information about the characters. I feel like they mentioned that the main character, I think his name is Noah or
Henry.
or Henry. He's struggling. They didn't say about what, but he has to do a lot of creative stuff in order to kind of appease this struggle that he's going through. And so he's probably going to be the main kind of plot mover as far as the context in the film. And interesting that they talked about modding and how he is going to be sort of like thinking outside the box and outside the limits of this Minecraft world in this film. And he's kind of viewed as like the modder. Not necessarily the rule follower, or not necessarily someone that knows the game, but or knows the game so well that he knows how to break the rules. And I thought that was really cool. The fact that they also mentioned modding was a great way to address the weird context of like 2 buckets and a chain coming together in the Minecraft crafting table, because it's like that's not a Minecraft thing, and every Minecraft player goes like, you can't do that. So like why is that in the movie? Well, they've explained a little bit more in that context. I also like the idea that is it Garrett Garrison is I think
that's Momoa's character, yeah.
Momoa's character, yeah. And we were joking that it sounds like a wrestler name from the 80s. Well, he's a former professional gamer from the 80s.
Yes.
Is his player context, right? And that makes sense. And I was thinking about this after. It makes a lot of sense why, I mean, he'd be sort of weirded out by being teleported to this strange world, but pixel graphics would make a lot of sense to him.
Yes.
Because if he was a gamer in the 80s, the graphics back then were not the greatest. And so if he spent a lot of time on like, I don't know, Pac-Man or Asteroids or like those kind of like different games in 80s arcades, then he would know like the pixel graphics and stuff like that. I mean, 80s would also have Nintendo and that kind of stuff as well, but those were again 8 and 16-bit, systems. And I think that puts a really interesting kind of context on like his personality and where he might be mentally in terms of this like familiar but unfamiliar Minecraft world. And so I feel like there's this cool mishmash of like the kid that plays Minecraft and understands it, potentially the older sister that rolls her eyes at her younger brother. I don't know. They sort of haven't really given us much more about the other characters. But then having the older gamer that either doesn't get Minecraft and maybe warms up to it over the course of the movie. Like there's a bunch of things that I can see being mirrors of the experience that some people have with Minecraft. Maybe parents with kids were like, my kid's really into this game, but it looks really blocky and weird. Like, how do I even get into it? And it's like, wait a minute, this looks like Mario when I was a kid. Like I can see parents and some people that are maybe not strong gamers coming into Minecraft and being like, oh, this is sort of familiar, and I think that they're sort of doing that with the movie. But I liked the way that they went about it. I thought it was cool to see all the behind the scenes. The interview with Jared Hess was cool in terms of like communicating his vision. They were also very specific in saying that it was called a Minecraft movie on purpose and not the Minecraft movie, because it's meant to be an interpretation and perhaps not the only Minecraft movie we'll ever see.
Yeah, definitely. And also not the only Minecraft story that will be told. Like, it's very much not like the story of Minecraft. It's not like why the overworld came to be. It's like these people's journey specifically. I want to say that I was right about their reasons for making it live action. They specifically said, like, the community has put in a ton of work into animated projects, and I think it's so good that they're, like, acknowledging that along the way and giving people their props, but then saying, we want to be able to set ourselves apart and see what we can accomplish in, like, a grander scale in live action. And I think that makes perfect sense, not to mention they have an animated Minecraft series coming to Netflix, so you get both if that's what you're looking for. And yeah, the fantasy of like, what if I was a real person in the Minecraft world? Would I be able to survive? Like, is kind of borne out in the journey of real characters occupying this kind of physical space, and it's about the people, not just about the game. I think that's the key thing to take away from it, is like they're not trying to tell a story that takes place in Minecraft. They're trying to tell these people's story, and the Minecraft world is like, it's almost like an allegory or something. Like it's a metaphor for the journey that they're going through creatively and overcoming struggle. And that's how these family movies get made. That's like the same thing with every Pixar movie, like it's always just about somebody overcoming the obstacles in their life. So I think it makes a lot of sense the way they put it. Jason Momoa's character reminds me immediately, knowing that he's like a gamer who peaked in the 80s. There's this documentary called King of Kong, which is a guy trying to beat the high score record for Donkey Kong that was set by a professional video game player in like arcade in the 1980s. And I think, although I don't know if it's covered in the documentary itself, it came out afterwards that the guy he was trying to beat actually like cheated by emulating the game instead of playing it on original hardware. And so there's a little bit of that kind of going on. I think the guy's name even sounds sort of similar to like the Garrett Garrison kind of construction of Jason Momoa's character's name. His name's like Billy Mitchell or something like that. So he's got like a little bit of that ring to his name, you know? And so, yeah, that kind of popped up for me as like immediately, okay, I understand that character a lot more now that they've told us that. And obviously in a teaser trailer, you could only show so much. It's like a minute's worth of, and it's not even, that full minute probably isn't even all footage. It's certainly not all acting. And so many of the shots were CG augmented because they are showing the broad, like sweeping scope of the world. And so that led a lot of people to assume that these actors were just walking around on a green screen and absolutely nothing was there around them. But seeing the production design, seeing the square melons that the props team had put together and the way they've done the trees and changed the scale to be like 2/3 Minecraft scale, basically. The blocks are all like 2 feet instead of 3 feet. They're not like a meter by a meter. They're 60 centimeters or something. Like, I think it's really neat to know some of that stuff and not just assume, well, they've arbitrarily made all of these decisions and no thought was put into it, which I think is the way a lot of people go when they don't have that information. And it's not the type of information that you put in a teaser trailer. You know, they're not saying like, hey, we did all of this stuff behind the scenes when you're trying to advertise the experience of going to the film. I think the modder thing is so important as well. Like, not only is it like a tribute to the modding community and like, you know, the creativity of players who use vanilla Minecraft as a canvas for their own ideas, it's trying to explain why this character comes into the world and everything changes. And they said, like, the Steve character is the guy who knows everything about this world, but he's just been there for a while and he's kind of conformed to the rules. And so you bring somebody in who's a non-conformist and they're effectively modding things with their imagination. I think that's cool. I think that's a fun-sounding idea for the movie. So I honestly think they've got the right head on their shoulders when it comes to this sort of adaptation of Minecraft for film. I think the thing that remains to be seen is the film compelling? Is the plot enjoyable? Are the performances decent? And I still think it's too early to prejudge any of that stuff. But I like the visual style of what we saw in the trailer, and I like it even more now that we've seen how much of it was done practically in the behind-the-scenes footage.
They did show us a little bit extra in terms of the clip when they were all interacting with the crafting table as well. And I can anticipate a lot of inside one-liners for players that are going to know. And in the context, Garrett Garrison threw a bunch of stuff on a crafting table and said, "Watch this, I'm going to make a cool weapon." And it ended up being a couple of buckets. And Steve, Jack Black's character, was just like, "Oh, don't worry, buckets are useful here."
Yeah.
And like everybody that plays Minecraft is like, I understand. I totally get it. And I think that's a good nod to like that kind of stuff. And if they do that enough, like I think they'll be paying attention to players and what they are bringing to the movie and how much of the player experience they can get there. And just as you were speaking about props and the scaling and stuff, it's actually the reverse of what so many of us do in Minecraft. You see something in the real world that you're inspired by, and you go to build it in Minecraft. And you have to change the scale, change the way that things work in order to make it work in Minecraft's world. And this is just the reverse. They're taking Minecraft's world and putting it into the real world, ours, in a film, and they had to change the scale and change the way that it worked in order to make it work, right? Like it's just a flip. And I mean, a real challenge. I imagine the puzzle nature of the production design, there must have been some head scratching at first. Like there must have been like how do we even do this? You know, like I would love to see some more in-depth interviews. I hope when the movie does come out that Minecraft, maybe on their YouTube channel or in other places, puts out, I would love to see a documentary on the making of it, but I would be happy with even just another featurette, but like a full hour long or 30-minute long a discussion about how it was actually made from start to finish once it's been out and you're no longer spoiling anything. Like I would love to see that. I think that would be really, really cool.
I'm going to make a prediction right now about the scene with the buckets. I think Momoa's character is I mean, kind of a hybrid of the backyard wrestler idea that we had previously. I think he's a professional fighting game player, and I think what he's going to do,
Oh,
even because he was trying to make a weapon and he made those two buckets, by the end of the movie, breaks the chain on the two buckets, wears each of them on his fist, and starts punching stuff. Because they're going to be punching trees in this movie, right? So, like,
yeah.
he has like Hulk hands, but they're big like metal buckets. Like there's a scene in The World's End, the Simon Pegg Cornetto trilogy movie, where Nick Frost's character ends up fighting people like that with two bar stools, one on each hand, and he's using them like they're the Hulk's like fists. I can see them doing that with buckets and it being really fun as like a stunt. So yeah, that's my prediction. See if that comes true when the Minecraft movie comes to cinemas. Let's move on. Let's talk about the Pale Garden. This was the major feature drop that they talked about, and it seems to just be like one of these smaller gameplay drops that they were talking about rather than the core of a big thematic update. It seems like the Pale Garden and the Creaking are it, but there's a lot to unpack from just those two features. So the biome itself, they talked about like being a desaturated environment, feeling kind of spooky. It's eerie during the day because you can't see very far out into the environment. There's a lot of trees. It's sort of like being in a roofed forest, and there's hanging moss everywhere. And then at night, that's when the environment changes. You get more ambient sound, and the creaking emerges from the trees nearby. So that was a really fun thing to discover about the Creaking, was that it's a very different mob to the type of stuff that we've encountered. So let's talk about the biome first. What were your first impressions seeing like the color of the environment and the type of blocks that we've got going on here?
So I think in the context of Agnes explaining it, I was like, oh, cool. Like they're doing something dark and creepy. And as we were watching it, I was being careful to like understand that it's a work in progress and trying to like really understand what they were going for. But after sitting on it for a couple of days, I'm a little underwhelmed by the environment. It does just sort of feel like they've pulled the saturation down in the biome, and it doesn't really have the same level of, we'll say, immersion that other biomes do. Like you can be in a jungle biome and you can be in mushroom fields. They're drastically different, but they still feel like Minecraft. And this just feels like Minecraft, but like just weirdly dialed down. And I think after looking at it for a while, it's the contrast that's missing. It's they've turned down the color saturation, but then in doing so, everything kind of just is muddled, and it doesn't really give you a good silhouette or a good definition of what's going on. And I'm wondering if that's something they're trying to communicate, the idea of being lost, being hard to see where you are, having the creaking blend in with the trees. But I think the challenge there is that you're trying to make it visually hard to see without using any kind of fog in the game. And any other RPG that I've ever walked into a creepy forest, like your visibility is low because there's mist or fog or cobwebs or something. And they're doing okay with the hanging moss and the pale moss, but I feel like they need some more contrast. And I hope that they can do something like maybe up the contrast on the bark of the trees, changing the textures in there might help. I think that it could still use some color, and I'm hoping that they're going to listen to player feedback over the coming weeks, because I know that they want it to be dark and creepy, but like even the darkest stuff in like a Tim Burton movie will still have some color in it. And I think that, you know, going for low hanging fruit, like mushrooms are kind of creepy. You know, you could have orange mushrooms growing on the trees, which would also fake out the players because it looks like the three eyes of the creaking. There's a lot of, again, I'm bringing up Satisfactory, but there's a lot of caves in Satisfactory that have blue mushrooms, and they're tall. Like you could have like Minecraft's first 2-block tall mushroom, you know, in terms of like that kind of a plant could be in the game. And it could be like a pale blue. These don't have to be primary colors. Like they don't have to be like the neon lights behind me, but like they could be, you know, something that fits in the context. But just because something is supposed to be bleak and creepy doesn't mean it has to be black and white. There's something very immersion breaking about the current level of desaturation, and I hope that they can address that in the coming weeks, because it does sort of pull me out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I've seen similar feedback from folks online as well. Like, I think a lot of people have said the Pale Garden name evokes more floral imagery than we've seen in the biome
Yeah.
so far, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think if they just wanted to pull from existing stuff in Minecraft, Lily of the Valley could be added there very easily without too much fuss. And I don't know if flower stem color is affected by biome tint. But the
I don't
green of
know.
the flower might stand out a little bit, but then obviously the white is going to be the primary thing. It provides white dye, and so that has association with bone meal as well. So there's potentially like a vaguely creepy connection if you make a couple of leaps of logic. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think the more common criticism I've seen is that this is one of those biomes where you're going to go to it once, acquire the sapling from the trees, and then sort of never go back. And on the one hand, some people consider that a problem because they want new features in Minecraft to be something they interact with all the time, right? Something to celebrate. And I think people are still going to be using the wood type a lot. But I think if the way people play Minecraft is just to go and get resources from certain biomes, you probably do that with a bunch of biomes already anyway. Like, who visits birch forests, dark oak, savanna, snowy taiga biomes, those kind of biomes regularly, unless you're like intentionally building a base there. Like, I think there are mechanics biomes, there are building biomes, and there are resource biomes. And this
Mm-hmm.
feels like primarily the third type, but with a little bit of the first two thrown in there, because you've got the creaking heart and the creaking that it generates. And if you're building stuff there, it's going to be spooky stuff, right? Like, unless you have an idea for the grass color lending itself towards a different tone, most of the time you're going to be going there, you're going to be building your Halloween district for your server. You're going to have like a graveyard or something that you want to build there, and all of the spooky ambience of the biome around you can contribute to that. But I think it's the same story as you get with like savanna biomes. You go there, you get acacia saplings, and then you leave because you don't like the grass color. And I think that's
Yeah.
ultimately the way people use a lot of biomes in Minecraft. There are 50 plus at this point, and I build in like 3 of them ever. So unless you're challenging yourself to build something there, and in that case you're challenging yourself to build everywhere, and it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's like a pale grass biome or not. I think some people are just going to go there, get the resources that they can duplicate at home, and then take that stuff home to their nice bright plains biome and figure out how they want to use white wood and hanging moss and everything. So I think it's really just about the adventure gameplay experience, and in that sense, I feel like going in there and getting lost and struggling to find your way out of the biome as night closes in and the creaking intensifies around you, both in terms of the mob and also in terms of the ambient sounds, I think that's probably going to hit the mark a little bit closer. But for folks like us who are regular Minecraft players who want to, get a long-term thing out of a biome like this, we're going to find, I think, long-term uses limit themselves to just like building something spooky there when it's fall season and it feels like that's in the air.
Yeah, I think we need a little bit more information about how other trees and leaf blocks act in the area. Like, does it work the same way as the desert does? Is everything desaturated? Do
It
things
will
that,
be like
yeah.
I want to cut in on that, because in the post-show
Oh, they
developer
caught it in
kind
the
of thing,
developer preview?
they didn't explicitly say it, but I saw some of the stuff built in the background of the village that they had built to showcase some of the new wood type. They had planted
Right.
a couple of the pale oak trees there, so they looked like they were fully generated. They had the bark and everything, and there was like normal leaf color in there, so it's a biome tint color for both grass and leaves. If you put the trees elsewhere, their leaf color changes. And as far as I'm aware right now, they're probably just copying dark oak leaves and oak leaves because those already use the same thing. And pale oak seems like, by the name, is just a variant on oak again. Even the trees
Right.
themselves right now just look like reskinned dark oak trees. And that's something I would honestly really like them to change. Like, I could go for a slightly different tree style to match that spooky atmosphere. I think that might go a long way if it had like gnarled roots and stuff like that. A little closer to mangrove, but maybe slightly closer to the ground. But then, yeah, on around the edges of one of the top-down screenshots of the biome as it was in place, there was a river biome kind of separating it from a dark oak forest, and the leaves started to blend outwards into the green color that they get in a river biome as well. So I'm pretty confident that that's a biome color thing. If you take a jungle tree there, it's going to have grayer leaves than it is in, a jungle environment or a plains biome.
Right. Is it going to have a grayer trunk too? Like that's it. I'm curious about that kind of stuff because we've got leaf blocks that do that now in Minecraft, but most of the time building blocks don't.
Yeah, they don't.
And so, yeah. So I'm just curious about how that's going to work and how that's going to affect blocks that don't change. Like azalea doesn't change when you take it to different biomes, right? So that could be kind of cool to mess with. But is that going to be cool to mess with, or is it going to be so contrasty and so odd looking that you're just like, well, this is kind of pointless. Like I don't want to do this, even though I can.
Something to test in snapshots, I think.
Yeah, and I think too, to your point, one of the things that I find again sort of underwhelming about the biome is the geometry of it. Like it looks like just another biome full of trees. Like it's not all that interesting. And I think that they could do more with the trees. I think that having a different variety and shape. I think they should also consider how many people dislike mangrove trees and how hard they are, or how much of a pain in the butt they are. They're not hard. How much of a pain they are to harvest from. I think that if they take that in consideration and make it cool looking, but also make it not be a giant pain in the butt to harvest those woods, I think that would be great. For future context. I think that it needs to be, I understand that it could be just a resource biome, but just because it's a resource biome doesn't mean it has to be boring. I feel like Badlands are resource biomes for me most of the time. I don't really build there much, but they're resource biomes, but they're still really cool. Like they're still cool to look at. They're still cool to travel through. And this, I know it's supposed to be creepy and dangerous, but it should still be a cool experience. So I'm hoping that they add more. And I mean, again, I'm sure they're going to be open to feedback, constructive feedback from players saying like, here's an idea to add to it. I think that the mission statement is cool. I think that they just need to stick the landing on it to have it not be a really kind of underwhelming addition. How do you feel about the creaking? Because the experience, which was a twofold, I really liked what they did in the presentation with the villager news, which was in context, showcasing and kind of teasing the creaking before they revealed it. But then actually seeing the creaking in the game and how it worked and all that kind of stuff, I thought was really unique. Like, what was your first impression of it?
Yeah, I thought they are reaching back to the concepts they were working with when they were brainstorming for the Deep Dark and for the Warden. I think the asymmetric design, the sort of unreadable face of it, immediately brought to mind the Stalker, which was one of the prototype Warden designs they had going on. We saw a concept art sheet for these ages ago, so I'll try and find that online and add it to the video version of this so that people can see. But I think they're sort of reaching back into that, like, horror aspect of Minecraft with low visibility, kind of emulating the days when people had low render distance and it always felt like you were being watched from just beyond the fog border. Like the fact that fog is tied to how far the player can see, and that's a slider that's adjustable, and it's adjustable very far on modern systems, is one of the reasons I think it's been difficult for them to implement any kind of horror feature, because I've seen fog implemented in Minecraft that kind of draws in on some of the modded biomes in the Fantasy Minecraft SMP, and it works to a point, but then there's still some level of immersion that I think the team creating vanilla Minecraft might not be satisfied with. So they're trying to emulate that through the environment and leaving the fog as something that's controlled by player render distance. And that's tricky. Like, they're kind of hamstrung by that a little bit. But I think the creaking as a mechanic feels really new and interesting, and I think it's an idea that a lot of players are bouncing off, like, as a knee-jerk reaction, getting kind of frustrated, because the Warden was like this when they were discussing, should you even be able to kill the Warden? Should it just be something that you're forced to avoid? And players pushed back against that because they liked the idea of ultimately being able to overwhelm it as a challenge, right? And then the trade-off for that was that the Warden didn't drop anything for a while, and then eventually it was just given a single skulk catalyst to drop. But now they're reaching back into that concept by saying the creaking is something that you cannot just fight. If you attack it, it doesn't deal any damage as long as you're in survival mode. I think you can destroy them in creative. But in survival mode, you tap it and this line of particles directs you back to this block in the tree. I think that's such a unique concept. The notion that, and they said this in the presentation and it made it even more creepier, is that the block is effectively puppeteering these invulnerable creatures to come and attack you, but then you're able to detect where the block is and destroy the block, and that removes the mob. Like, I think that's interesting, but it breaks traditional like combat gameplay in a way that is quite a bold move. Like, I won't say I think it's good or bad, because I think they're trying to avoid power creep. They're trying to avoid just putting something in that has a higher HP threshold, so players just need to deal more damage to it, which makes it a more difficult encounter, because players will just find ways of overwhelming that stuff and like building power or like strategizing against it. Even the Warden now, the sort of way of defending against it is you pillar up 20 blocks and you shoot it constantly with a bow until it dies. And like, you can cheese a Warden that way. But the way of dealing with the Creaking is significantly different, because it's not just a damage sponge, it's literally invulnerable, but it can be destroyed in an instant if you just break a single block. So it's not like the Warden where once it's summoned, it's there and you have to wait for it to go away. It doesn't necessarily interrupt gameplay, it creates gameplay. And it creates gameplay of a different type than we're used to with a standard combat challenge in Minecraft. So I think I'm on board with it for now, especially when they've given you a telegraphed means to find the thing that's controlling it or generating it and destroying that. I think that works. I think it's just very new as a concept for a combat challenge, so it's going to be difficult for people to puzzle out if it's their first time experiencing it.
And I think they did a good job of balancing that with the fact that it only spawns at night, and allowing you to go to the Pale Garden and get the wood and the moss and the things that you want. If you have no interest in dealing with the Creaking, you can just go and get the things you want and then peace out and not ever have
do
to
it during the day and you're fine.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, it really gives options, I think, to players rather than forcing them. Like in the Deep Dark, you generally, unless you get really lucky or are very skilled, like, have to deal with the Warden at some point.
Yeah.
You are just, it's not something that you can just go during the day or nighttime and avoid. You have to do a lot of things to avoid it. And if you miss a skulk sensor or something like that, then you end up with the Warden. And I like your explanation of interrupting gameplay versus creating gameplay. I think that's a really good way of looking at the Creaking. I like that it creates gameplay. It's a really neat mechanic where it just only walks towards you when you're not looking at it. Mm-hmm. It's very Weeping Angel from Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's creepy anyway. I feel like the communication for the Creaking Heart and stuff is a lot clearer in the game developer preview than it was in the explanation.
Yeah.
I think that was really great to see that they're using that as a way to communicate where the Creaking Heart is to players rather than you having to look around for something. And I was thinking when we were talking about the Pale Garden, one of the things that could be added to it, which would be great, would be particle effects. But I'm wondering if they tried that and then it just was too much of a fight between the particle effects showing you where the Creaking Heart is and any kind of ambient particle effects.
Yeah.
Thinking like the ash that falls in a basalt delta, you know, would look really cool. Falling leaves or something like that, very similar to what we have in a cherry grove, but obviously gray or in the context of the Pale Garden. That would be very cool and very ambient, but it may also create a problem when you're trying to figure out where the particles from the Creaking are actually pointing you. Granted, they're different colors. The particles from the Creaking seem to be a mix of like a grayish green and some orange in there too, as it points towards the Creaking Heart. I'm curious. Something I noticed when they were doing the developer preview is that even when the Creaking is chasing you, you as a player are faster than it.
Yeah.
So you are always able to really kind of get away. So you are always going to be able to beat it to the Creaking Heart in a foot race. The question is, can you mine the Creaking Heart faster than it can catch you when you are no longer moving away from it? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting kind of mechanic, and there's going to be some skill. I also don't know, in a two-player situation, I didn't catch this because I think we might have been talking over it during the presentation, but if you and I are in the Pale Garden and there is a Creaking looking at us, if you continue to look at the Creaking and I go get the heart, like, does the Creaking stay staring at you and not move? You know, like, how does that work? Did both players have to be looking at it? Or, I mean, if there's more than one Creaking, are we then stuck? Like, how do we do that? I think that's an interesting dynamic, especially in a multiplayer server where, you know, like, especially if In context, I think the Tricky Trials update has potentially more things spawning when there's more players around. And so if you have more players, like, are there more creaking? Like, does the creaking heart produce 2 or 3 if there's 2 players as opposed to just 1 if there's just one of you? They didn't really have that explained if that was the case or not. And that could be feedback over the next couple of weeks as well. But I think that I like the mechanics of it. I would like to see the movement of it polished a bit. It feels very strange currently in 2024 to have a mob that works so stiffly and looks very much like an Enderman or a skeleton movement wise, but looks so different and modern compared to what we normally see in Minecraft as far as what people think a mob looks like from most marketing. And I think that something as simple as the weight that you see shifting in a sniffer or the wobble that you see in a frog walk cycle, know that that's possible. Like it's something that they can do and they can do well in Minecraft. The models didn't change. The models don't look modded. They don't look weird. It's just the way that those blocks are moving. And they have a really unique opportunity here with the creaking to have it kind of skitter or stutter in terms of its movement. And instead it kind of just shuffles. It's kind of funny that it moves kind of hip first. Like the hips are ahead of the shoulders, which is again strange. Almost like the center of gravity is pulling it forward and the rest is kind of being flopped behind it like a rag doll or a marionette, which again goes back to the puppet idea.
Yeah.
But I feel like it just has, because of the stiff legs, the shuffle just doesn't work for it. I think it needs to have more of a plot. And again, if the hips moved, if the weight shifted, like it's already asymmetrical and off center. So its movement, if it limped after you, creepy. Like just sold. Like it needs something beyond just like the weird little shuffle that it has now. And I'm hoping that they can add that in the coming weeks, because when you compare it to something like the sniffer or the frog, like it just feels dated when it's possible to have some cooler movement from a mob in Minecraft.
Even the warden, like I think looking at the element animations interludes where they had the creaking appear at the very end behind the tree and it snuck up on the villager who was like giving the news report, it looked like it hinged in different ways, and the way they animated it felt like it had a lot more character than the in-game mob did. But I think it's possible to get stuff like that out of the animation of mobs like the warden. I wonder if maybe they're trying to differentiate it from the warden in a way, but I think the mechanics work so similarly to a mob like the warden in that you're not supposed to just turn around and fight it, that maybe that kind of clues players in a slightly different way if they've already encountered the warden. It kind of feels like a cross between a warden and an enderman for me, in the sense of it, like it's sort of the reverse of an enderman where you want to look at it, whereas the enderman you don't want to look at it. It's kind of like an interesting kind of parallel or reverse of the way the endermen work. But yeah, like I can see a little bit of maybe technical use for the creaking as well. Like I didn't think of stuff immediately in the moment. I just thought, oh, that's a cool concept for a mob, but it's limited by a certain set of factors that I don't know if it's necessarily going to be leaping to mind immediately. Like, players can't farm anything from it. I think that's the main thing to take away right now, is that because it's not a traditional mob and you can't kill it in the usual way, it's not going to drop anything. And like, if destroying the creaking heart meant that the mob dropped something, you could just get a silk touch axe and break and replace that over and over again, and it would drop tons of whatever it was by spawning and despawning. So if anything, the creaking heart is the drop, which is a really strange concept to get across to people because it's a block and we're used to mining blocks to get them. That's how that works. I'm curious if the creaking heart drops anything if you break it without silk touch, because they did say silk touch was required in order to obtain it and use it elsewhere. So I'm kind of curious if they have anything in mind for like a drop that it gives you otherwise. It looks like it's kind of packed with sap or amber or something, so maybe there could be some other kind of material there, although I don't think that's in scope for this update necessarily. But outside of farming it, the technical uses for it started to suggest themselves afterwards. I saw people saying that they could be a really fun way to distract the warden, because presuming they make noise when they move around, the warden basically gets an infinite punching bag that can't be killed. So like if you bring a creaking heart down there with a couple of logs and you set it up in the way that the logs have to surround the creaking heart in order for them to spawn, presuming it is nighttime and presuming that they require nighttime and not just darkness in order to spawn, then you raid an ancient city at night and the warden gets a distraction for 10 minutes beating up on a Creaking that's never going to die. So it's sort of similar to the way people take like a couple of observers down there and something that makes noise, like a note block or whatever, and distract the warden that way, but it's an organic way of doing that, which sounds kind of fun. I saw people potentially talking about using them as eye trackers, so you can tell which way a player is looking, because if you have some Creaking kind of behind them, they can step forward onto like a pressure plate or through some tripwire or something, and that activates redstone circuitry that's behind the player because the Creaking walks over it when the player isn't looking at them, and that can effectively work like a reverse way of determining an eye tracker. So there's potential for stuff like that. It's kind of goofy, and like there's probably better ways of doing stuff like that, but I like the idea of something that gives us a mechanic we haven't really been able to interact with the game before, using just the direction of the camera to determine some sort of information. That's sort of similar to the fact that the wind charges added, like, you know, remote activation of stuff in that way by like firing a wind charge at a lever across the room, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, there are some little technical uses sort of suggesting themselves at this stage. There are some parameters that I'm just curious about when it comes to actually getting hold of them in the snapshot. I mean, I imagine people will be testing, do they need low block light in order to spawn? Or is that just like they will only spawn at night, but they spawn in any light level at night? Because controlling their spawn location does make things more interesting. Is it a nighttime thing, or is it just low light levels, in which case you could take the stuff down to a cave and set up like a dungeon crawl kind of experience where, regardless of the time of day, the Creaking would be active and would be trying to pursue you. There's potential for stuff like that mechanically to work in favor of players who want those mechanics, but it's unclear at this stage whether they're doing that or not. And I have a couple of ideas for ways that the Creaking could improve as an experience, and maybe the players' early encounters with them could be made a little easier. Like, what if, because it's made of wood, you could set them on fire using a flint and steel, and that wouldn't necessarily damage them, but it's similar to when you set an Enderman on fire and they teleport around everywhere. If it runs around like a headless chicken whilst it's on fire for a little while, then that gives you more time to go and get the Creaking heart without it coming up behind you and damaging you. And so I'm wondering if maybe there are refinements to this mob's behavior that can be made before it gets released that allow players a little bit more interaction with it in ways that make it kind of an easier experience, or like a more inventive experience dealing with it one-on-one.
Even if it's not taking damage from the fire and is still able to run around, like, then you'll be able to see where it is, you know, compared to when it's blending in with the surroundings too, right? I like that idea, especially as that's just a natural thing to try to do with a mob that looks like it's made of wood.
Yeah,
right? Like,
not everyone's going to have a flint and steel on them at all times, but like if you know about it and you think, well, that's made of wood, why can't I just set it on fire? Like, yeah,
exactly.
I think that's kind of fun. No one's setting pillager captains on fire anymore, so we need to have another mob to set on fire, I guess. Yeah.
When we get into the pale oak wood that is coming with the biome, I think a really good place to start would be the email from Blast Jordan 563 that had some potential pale garden structures as the subject line. Hi, Joel and Pix. During Minecraft Live, we got to see the new biome that's being worked on, the Pale Garden. However, there was no mention of potential structures that might be spawning in the biome. I think, due to the serenity of the biome, they could have a ruined structure that mimics some old crumbling pagodas, or maybe they could allow for jungle temples to spawn in the Pale Garden as well. Would love to hear your thoughts on this. Best regards, Blast Jordan 563 was squished by the serenity of the biome because the atmosphere was too heavy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think a new structure is probably out of the scope of this update at this stage, because structures, like any feature of Minecraft, are going to take a bit more time, and I think if they wanted to design a structure between now and, you know, full release in December or whenever, like in a few months' time, they could do it, but it might feel a little bit rushed by Mojang's quality standards, right? I like the idea of spawning existing structures in there, And the jungle temple fits that kind of grayscale vibe and that mossy vibe, but it's a different kind of moss. It's like a brighter green. And
Yeah.
I think they would suit the environment really well, if not for the fact that they already appear in jungles and the jungle environment is so much more colorful. But I think there is certainly scope for structures to appear in the Pale Garden in future. If not with this drop, then perhaps like they add another drop in future that refines Pale Gardens and adds more lore to them, more story in a sense, by adding unique structures. They could even be a really interesting spot for trail ruins to generate, thinking of existing structures that would work quite well in there, because that implies that the pale terrain over the top has this colorful thing underneath, and maybe players get clued into a story of how there was this colorful civilization there before, but then the color sort of crept out of the environment around them, and they got buried over time, and maybe they decided to move on from there because it was getting too spooky for them, like the villagers in the villager news segment. Like, I think there's maybe room for stuff like this, and I could see trail ruins being another reason to visit that biome, in the same way that they added a bit more to taiga biomes and birch forest, the type of things that I was thinking of earlier as resource biomes. That could be a possibility.
For me, I think that something that's missing is the context of the pale oakwood. And in the same way that you get villages that are made in different biomes, making use of the different woods that are around, indicating to the player that there's different materials available in that area, I think that they could have some ruined structures. I don't think it needs to be like a witch hut or a jungle temple. I'm thinking more along the lines of like abandoned or broken nether portals. Like that level of like stuff that's just like kind of like around. It's not really there to other than to like maybe communicate something to the player. Having like an old well that's got some pale wood as part of the construction could be cool. An old like a fenced in garden, like just showing the pale fences with a couple of plants inside, just for no other reason than just to have it there to break up the environment a bit and showcase the pale oak, I think could be quite useful. Those are the kind of things that I was thinking of as far as structures, not necessarily something that was going to have a lot of gameplay around it. I like the idea of trail ruins. I think that adding archaeology is something that we've mentioned before as a long-term augmentation to new things. So like you add a new biome, and then for another update, another game drop later on down the line, you go, hey, wait a minute, we could take some time and put some archaeology into this biome, which adds gameplay to this new biome from an existing feature in the game. And I think that there could be something like that that could happen easily in the Pale Garden. I don't know what because the Pale Garden is such a surface level biome, like when you start digging down, like what does it look like when you hit a geode? Like it's all bright purple, right? Like it's going to be interesting to see how those kind of contrasts happen within the Pale Garden. So yeah, I think that structures could be interesting, but I don't think it warrants, especially with the vibe that they're trying to go for, like having a weird, like creepy mansion or a creepy hut or something in there. I just think starts to add to like, well, who lived here and what was why, as opposed to just having it being a bleak, like, maze of trees. And again, having a big structure like that gives you a landmark that you can see above the canopy if it's large enough. And that's why I think something like having a well or something low to the ground. I was even thinking earlier when we were talking about like different white blocks, like bone blocks, and stuff, that having fossils like just kind of stick out of the ground in the Pale Garden could be interesting as well. Different bone deposits and things like that could help, because it's gonna be something that's inside the forest, but not something you can see from above to kind of get your bearings. And I think that would be important to like maintain that level of, you can get turned around in this place really easily because everything kind of looks the same.
Yeah, like bone deposits would be super creepy now that I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And to sort of answer my own question from earlier about what you go to dark oak forests for, woodland mansions. Like this seems like right now it's it's like a new take on the dark oak forest. It's the pale oak forest, and I wonder if the thing with woodland mansions is that they are huge and quite saturated in terms of the wood that's made that they're made from already. And I feel like a pale oak version of a woodland mansion like color harmony wise would look like it was all over the place. Like the kind of the pale wood and cobblestone, I can't imagine being a great combo, but who knows? I can be proved wrong. But I do wonder if, something smaller, something that you can't see from the outside the way you can Woodland Mansion, so you're really forced to go down below the canopy and experience the biome as intended in order to find, makes a lot more sense. And I love the idea of the well. Like, that's another imagery from, like, horror movies, you know, like having to hide in a well from something or something coming out of a well to attack. It's got that creepy vibe to begin with, almost like Grimm's fairy tales kind of, like, atmosphere to it. So I think maybe that's a good call for structure stuff. And relatively simple to design, too. As far as Pale Oak itself, though, I'm honestly really happy just taking it out of the trees and taking it somewhere else and using it somewhere else, because it's a white wood set, which is something they even acknowledged this in the Minecraft Live show. People have been asking for a really long time. It's been on players' hit list for, like, you know, wish list for a very long time. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're, like, a little more attuned to this kind of stuff, but I think the planks look like they have a touch of pink to them. They're trying to keep a little bit of that, like, reddish brown, very, very light in there. And maybe it's just because they used them in tandem with cherry wood in a few of the previews, but it looked to me like they had a little bit of that kind of rosy undertone to them. So they match quite well with quartz. They probably fit fairly well with some of the other white blocks, but there's still signs of life in there.
I didn't catch that. It could have been context, like it could have been the fact that it was next to the cherry wood and it was next to things like quartz. I could also see them doing it on purpose, because one of the problems that you have with something like a white concrete is that it's a blue white, like it's a pure, very, very untarnished white, whereas quartz has got a lot of warmth to it, and they don't really look all that good right next to one another. You tend to have to separate them with another block. So having something of a hue inside the pale oak would make sense. Right now, what I find, and I need to get my hands on it, like, it's really hard with screenshots to not, like, to be able to make a call on it. But I feel like the feedback they're probably going to get is that it's not quote unquote white enough. It looks pretty gray to me. And I don't necessarily think it needs to be overall brightened. I think that it just might need a little bit more contrast. Like, I feel like the whites in it could be whiter, and they could leave kind of like the grooves between the planks and stuff like that, kind of where they are, and just create a little bit more contrast. Like, I feel like the pale oak has got the same problem as the biome, is that it's kind of muddy. There's not a lot of contrast. Whereas you look at something like spruce or oak wood, it's a little bit clearer in terms of the context of the texture. And I think that this is good, but it's a little, I want to say dirty. Like, there's a lot of specks in it. And again, I hope that that's something that they can refine over time with feedback from players. But I think that the general feedback is going to be like it's a little gray and it's a little low contrast for what people might want. That's the planks, though. I really had a hard time getting a good look at the stripped wood and the stripped pale oak. And again, difficult to see that in context with all the different blocks going by in the developer preview as to how it looked next to quartz, calcite, diorite, like those different blocks, and whether or not it works really well. It's going to look great in high contrast, like darker blocks like dark oak and your blackstones and your other blocks and things like that. It'll look really good next to blackstone if it does have some pink in it, because blackstone's got a lot of purple in it, so it's really going to feel like it works in that kind of like magenta area. But yeah, I feel like the texture itself is something that I would just need more hands-on with in a snapshot to really mess around with and experience. But I like the idea that you've got a white block that's accessible, that's renewable, that doesn't require going to the nether. Like, there's a lot of things that creatively, even in people that, you know, for people that play a peaceful mode, like, you're going to be able to get some of these woods without having to worry about going to the nether and all that stuff, which is cool. I think that the trapdoors and the doors are also really unique. The trapdoors, it's nice to not have a hole in it, like it's another solid trapdoor that you can use. That's going to be great for people that want to build more intricate shapes out of pale planks and pale wood, because you have that extra kind of like quarter block 2 pixel width or 4 pixel width that you can mess with. And then the doors have a lot of wrought iron work on them. They look kind of like farm doors, or they kind of lean into the cottagecore trend that we've seen the last few months and stuff.
Modern farmhouse aesthetic is what I get from the doors, definitely.
Yeah, sliding barn doors, almost like repurposed a little bit.
Hmm.
And so I like that as well. And they look really good as double doors. Like they really sell a build with like two doors facing one another. But like because it's such a light block, it's going to work so well with so many other non-white blocks. Like put it next to any of the concretes, it's going to look great. You know, like, put it next to any of the darker blocks, it's also going to look great. Even the 50% gray stone is a lot darker than the pale oak wood. And so I think that it's going to be just really, really versatile, and you're going to see a lot of uses for it.
Yeah, like I think even the bark texture is a departure from some of the other trees. Like it's got more of
Oh,
the kind of
totally.
little segments of bark, almost like scales of bark to it,
Yeah.
which is really different from what you see in the other trees. But I'm a big fan. Like the texture looks like it strings together really well, like it tiles very well. And it's a little bit closer to some of the modded trees that I've been looking at recently on Fantasy SMP. So I'm not complaining. Like I want to get more time
Yep.
with it, obviously, but I think it
Sure.
looks really cool. What I think it still needs, like I said earlier, is some variation in the trees. And it looks like since they're modeled on dark oak trees right now, it's going to be a 2x2 of saplings to get hold of like a full tree, which on the one hand means lots of wood and potentially lots of wood to disguise the creaking heart in there. So that may be why they went with this design to begin with, is that it's got a lot of dense wood in there that it's easier to hide a block like that. But I would like to see them do a single sapling tree as well, just for variety. I think it's so nice when we have trees like spruce or jungle where you can do a single sapling and a 2x2, both for farming and for detail, for decoration, and being able to populate an area with those trees makes it feel more diverse. So if you can create a forest environment that has a mix of that stuff, dark oak forests already have birch and oak trees mixed in with them, whereas the pale oak biome, as far as we can tell, the pale garden is a monoculture. And I think that might be one of the reasons you find it boring, is because there's not a whole lot of other stuff. If you threw birch
Yeah.
trees in there as well, then the leaf color would be slightly different, but the birch trees are still black and white. And so maybe there's room for a couple of those to be dotted around and it doesn't disturb the atmosphere too much. But I think, yeah, I think some variation in the trees would go a long way. And the wood itself feels really usable to me. Like you said, high contrast builds. We talked about the kind of Tim Burton aesthetic before. Like, you could very easily put this with deep slate and tough bricks and stuff. In fact, the tough bricks I saw in the developer preview was one of the things that clued me into the fact that there's still some warmth in it, because the tough bricks looked really blue-green by comparison next to them, the way they used them as like a border around the bottom of a house and then some steps leading up to the door. I think that's the best example of how contrasting those were. So maybe give that a look if you can find it. But yeah, really like the door and the trapdoor textures a lot. And I am imagining a lot of people will want to retexture specifically this fence so it looks a lot closer to the kind of white picket garden fence that you'd see in suburban homes.
Yeah.
But that'd be like a change to the model where the traditional Minecraft model of stuff doesn't quite look like that. But yeah, a pretty simple fix to do with a resource pack, I imagine, if that's the aesthetic you're after. Overall, though, I think there's a lot to digest from what seems like a relatively small gameplay drop to most people's standards, especially compared to like larger thematic updates. And I think that's the thing to take away from this Minecraft Live, is that we're now seeing the direction that gameplay development is going in terms of like smaller stuff. So we'll see how the community feels about that. I imagine a few people will feel underwhelmed because they were expecting something more grand, but we had this signposted to us for the last little while that it's going to be a smaller set of development updates from now on. So we'll see how that goes and how development continues from this point. For now, though, we're going to wrap up our discussion there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me. The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you get some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community, where pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week. We also have monthly and quarterly hangouts. The quarterly hangout is coming up pretty soon in October, and the monthly hangout just happened, but there's going to be one of those at the end of October where you can share what you've been up to in Minecraft that month. We currently have 309 patrons, which is the same as last week. There is always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. That also includes YouTube, where you can watch the video version of the show. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. You can find the RSS feed linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but on Only Go by Pixelriffs, you can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is returning in October, along with a new Skyblock series I'll be launching as well. I'm also streaming 3 days a week on Twitch, finishing stuff up on the Fantasy SMP. I'm also playing a little bit of Elden Ring on the side. You can find that at twitch.tv/pixelriffs. I am also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick search on YouTube. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be linked at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I saw Transformers 1 last week, so I'll be talking about that soon. And I'm keeping up on Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. I stream on Twitch several days a week now, including a lot of time in Satisfactory, but I will also be playing Minecraft, and that is Joel Duggan on Twitch. I'm very, very easy to find, so you can look forward to that.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but what's that creaking noise?